Hi, it's Terry Ryder from Hotspotting. I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in New South Wales in terms of property markets, particularly regional New South Wales. The regions of New South Wales are undoubtedly trending in different directions to what's happening with property markets in Sydney. And we can illustrate that point in a number of different ways, including what's happening with vacancy rates, what's happening with sales volumes, and what's happening with prices. I'll focus firstly on vacancy rates. It's a market barometer that's very important but doesn't get talked about much in mainstream media. Both vacancy rates and rentals media tends to be pretty much obsessed with what's happening with prices, median prices, whether up or down, as the major, in fact, the only barometer of property markets. But at Hotspotting, we look at other things because we think they're as important and in some cases more important. Firstly, vacancy rates. I'm just referring, I have in front of me here a media article talking about vacancy rates in both Sydney and in regional New South Wales. Now, the first thing that stands out is one of the problems with media misinformation. I did my weekly War on Misinformation broadcast through this medium earlier today. One of the problems I'm going to be touching on in coming weeks in that segment is the problem created by the headlines. Quite often, the problem with misinformation, particularly screaming negative misinformation, is not so much the content of the article, it's the headline that somebody puts on top of it, which in some cases is not supported by the information in the article. The headline is not just a beat up, it's just a lie quite often. Now, the headline on this article says vacancy rate creeps back up in Sydney. But then when you read the first paragraph of the story, it says that Sydney's vacancy rate has actually dropped by 0.1 percentage point. So the article says Sydney's vacancy rate has fallen, but the headline screams that Sydney's vacancy rate has risen. I mean, how is it so? God knows. Just incompetence in the world of journalism. But there's so many examples like that. You know, the point of this article that screams out at me is that whether Sydney vacancy rates are rising or falling, they are relatively high relative to where they were, say, a year ago, and relative to other parts of the nation. Sydney actually has one of the highest vacancy rates amongst the capital cities. Now, most capital cities have very, very low vacancy rates. Some of them are below 1%, and some of them are between 1% and 1.5%. Sydney, according to SQM research figures, has a vacancy rate of 2.8% and rising. These are figures from the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, and they find that inner Sydney has a vacancy rate of 2.8%, middle Sydney a bit higher, 3.2%, and outer Sydney 2.8%. So the average of that is in the high twos, approaching 3%. But the point is the trend is up. Whereas in most of the key markets in regional New South Wales, the trend's actually quite different. Most locations have vacancy rates falling, and the vacancy rates are very, very low, much lower than Sydney's. In the Hunter region, the vacancy rate is dropping, and it's 1.6%. In Newcastle, it's 1.8% and trending down. Wollongong, it's 2.2%, but other parts of the Illawarra region, 1.3%, very, very low there. Mid-North Coast, about 2%. The Murrumbidgee region, 1.2%. The Orana region, 1.6%. The South Coast region, 1.8%. These are all very, very low vacancy rates, most of them below 2%, so tight rental markets. Central Coast is a bit higher, 2.4%. Central West region, 2.2%. Coffs Harbour, lower, 1.9%. The Riverina region, 2.2%. And the southeastern region of New South Wales, 2%. Albury is around 2%, and the Northern Rivers area is 1.3%. So the general trend, there are lots of numbers, apologise for that, but the general theme is that in regional New South Wales, vacancies are well below the 3% sort of equilibrium level, and in most cases, they're below 2%. So very tight rental markets. It's just another market that says that even as Sydney as an overall real estate market is showing some negative trends, regional New South Wales has shown lots of positive ones. So that's vacancy rates. I've just finished the latest research for the Price Predictor Index, and this week we published the latest edition of our quarterly report, the Price Predictor Index, which is based on looking at sales volumes. In other words, sales activity. We're looking at what are the patterns of demand. Quarter by quarter, our sales levels rising, falling, or sliding sideways, which tells us whether demand in those markets is improving or reducing. And so what we found there, not surprisingly, is that there are very few suburbs right across the Sydney metropolitan area where demand is rising. There are some, but there's not that many anymore compared to a couple of years ago when there are lots of them. But in regional New South Wales, the number of markets with growing demand is actually at record levels, record in terms of since we started doing this research for the Price Predictor Index about 4 years ago. So we've found in this latest research 39 local government areas through regional New South Wales where demand is rising. Strong growth markets right across regional New South Wales. So that's sales volumes. Now, in terms of prices, while we're doing our research into sales activity, we're also looking at what's happening with median prices in each town and suburb as we look at them as part of this research. And we found that there are a lot of places in regional New South Wales with very, very strong price growth in the last 12 months, including places that have shown further growth in the last quarter. So prices still rising in those areas. Newcastle and the Hunter region has been at the forefront of that trend. Lots of suburbs and towns throughout that region. City of Newcastle, the local government area of Lake Macquarie, the Hunter Valley towns like Maitland, Cessnock, etc. And then some of the locations in the Port Stephens area just outside Newcastle. Many of these places have had double-digit growth in their median prices, including some that are 15%, 20%. There's lots of other places around regional New South Wales that have shown similarly strong growth, including up in the northeastern part of the state where locations like Lismore and Kyogle and Casino have all had growth in the last 12 months above 10%. And there are many other places. So there's three markers: vacancy rates, sales volumes, and price movements. And they all say the same thing, that regional New South Wales is not only performing Sydney, which is trending down in all those areas, but it's one of the strongest market jurisdictions anywhere in Australia. Very, very strong rising markets right around regional New South Wales. So the point of the message is to counter some of the media headlines telling us that prices are just falling across Australia. I saw 3 or 4 headlines in Australian media today alone saying that very, very inaccurate, erroneous and unprofessional thing. We don't have markets falling across Australia. More markets are rising than falling. And as an example of that, regional New South Wales is one of those where there are many growth markets. The problem is most of our major media comes out of Sydney, and unprofessional, idiotic journalists are just extrapolating what's happening in their own backyard to the whole of the country. Very inaccurate, very unprofessional. They don't deserve to be employed anywhere, let alone in media, the people who write these articles, but that's what we've got to live with. That's it for now. Let's do it again soon. I'll keep doing posts, trying to bring you up to date with accurate information, positive stories to counter the negativity in media, and pointing out some of that media misinformation as I go along. That's it for now. Terry Ryder signing off. Do it again soon.